Hello, welcome to the Standout Agency podcast. This is episode 4 and it is titled Making AI Work for Your Agency. My name is Callum Healy. I'm an AI consultant for marketing agencies, helping them effectively embed and adopt AI into their agency.
And I'm Gareth Healy. I'm an ex-agency owner, author of the agency book Stand Out or Die, and now an agency growth advisor. And together we are Agents of Change, which is also the URL of our website.
Absolutely, and that's become quite a nice podcast opener.
It has, yeah. We're going to try and stick to that, aren't we? We are agentsofchange.com if you want to learn more about us. So Callum, what's the titles there?
Yep.
The first question for me really, I guess, is to go back a stage and think about how before you started working with agencies, you started to look at how AI works. We got really interested in AI, of course, and started to look at how it works and how it thinks.
Absolutely.
So what did you learn at that point?
Yeah, so context ultimately is something that is very relevant to my studies throughout my sort of education journey. I have a psychology degree and studied that for 5 years, including sixth form, and context is a massive part of how humans learn. But I was immensely fascinated by artificial intelligence because I'd spent so long studying the human mind, and that's kind of where I fell in love with using AI as almost my thinking partner and something that's just become part of my daily work as it has with yourself. And I'm sure many people watching, as they've searched up the keyword of AI, of course. And there are two main topics of AI, and machine learning is one of them, deep learning is another. And it's ultimately all about the kind of evolution and the study of how AI comes to think.
So there's many uses of AI, of course, but if we just go to our sort of base use and what many people will be most familiar with, when you type a question into the chatbot, what's actually happening?
Yeah, so many of you may know that computers fundamentally are processing information, and ultimately the whole way that they operate is through binary code, which is ones and zeros. Whenever you look at anything on a computer, it's just a massive string of ones and zeros. And like you would learn a new language, we speak English. If we were to learn French or Chinese, it's all about how we translate our language to theirs. And there is a study called natural language processing, which is all about how we can bridge the gap between human language and computer language. And so this starts with ultimately words becoming numbers. And there are certain processes of this. Vectorization was an earlier one. We now have things like embeddings, and it is a very long and complex process, but ultimately it's all about converting words to numbers, and semantic meaning is a factor of that. And so there are things called embeddings, and put it very simply, words with similar meanings will have similar vectors, and vectors are strings of numbers that translate to words. And so they sit together in some infinitely kind of multi-dimensional space where you see like it 3D, 4D, 5D. This is like 1000D, completely.
It's a big map. You see this.
And it has to have this level of complexity and these amounts of dimensions because there are so many words and so many meanings between different words. Every word has a relation to every single different word, and it's all about how they interact with each other. Very simply, AI has siphoned as much data as it can possibly handle, and it looks at all of the ways that words are usually interacting with each other on, say, web pages, massive data sets which they're trained on, and they'll realize that the word, say, king is very similar to the word queen. Those two come up in context A lot.
There's an association.
There's an
between
association.
those words, yeah.
So king might have an association with fantasy or knight or crown, things like this. And they learn over time by taking in all of these data sets how the words relate to each other. And so a good way of describing word to vec, and there's a lot of jargon here, but I'll try describe it as simply as I can, is that you can do kind of arithmetic with these words because they're numbers, they're vectors. I have an equation which I learned, which is simply if you take the context of king, and king has a vector, and you take away the vector for man. So these are all numbers, but they're, in our language it's king and man. Take away the vector for man, you add the vector for woman. So you take away the masculine element of this monarch. You then add a feminine sort of context of the monarch. That equation would equal queen.
Yeah, so it connects to queen on that map. Yeah.
So if you see these on a big embedding space, you'll see how it's all about space. And so king and queen will be close, man and woman will be close. Differences. It's all very interesting and complex stuff.
Yeah. So is that what we hear a lot about neural networks, don't we?
Yeah. So neural networks, yes. And ultimately, I was surprised by this. And we modeled the AI brain after the human brain to some degree, because that's the only level of intelligence we know. All of the animals have similar brains to us as well. And so we have neurons, and AI has artificial neurons. There are things called artificial neural networks, which is the very start of kind of these AI algorithms. There's things, recurrent neural networks. Now they're transformers. So if you see GPT, the actual acronym of GPT is Generative Pre-trained Transformer. This was the revelation, I believe in 2017 by Google researchers, and it made it so LLMs, large language models, as we interact with today mainly, it's allowed them to exist. And these have hundreds of billions of what's called parameters. There's these variables, and you can almost imagine these as little dials. There's weights and there's biases. And we gave AI the algorithms to learn. Very simply, it fails over and over and over again until it finds the correct tweaking of all these billions of dials to get from the input to the output to get to the correct word. And so we can't exactly map how AI gets from the input to the output and the correct word. And fundamentally, AI is based on probabilities. So when you see these machines, they are going from one word to another over and over and over again. And the highest probability in the calculations, these are trained by calculus, all these mathematical equations, they happen again, then it predicts the next word, then it predicts the next word.
So when anybody's using, we're talking about agencies here, of course, but when anybody's using AI in a chatbot form, it's not really understanding what we're saying, isn't it? It's
Exactly.
predicting the next, well, not just the next word, it's predicting the next set of words, isn't it? Which is a fact, but again, another fact that I just find incredible, because it doesn't feel like that when you're using it, does it? It doesn't feel as if it's, mechanically predicting the next words. It feels like it's actually, you're actually having a conversation, going backwards and forwards, and sometimes, it almost feels human.
Yeah, exactly. And so instead of AI knowing, say if you ask it to generate you an essay, it's not going to understand all of the essay and all the words and then just give it to you all at once. It's actually just very quickly going, here's the first word, here's the next word, here's the next word, here's the next word. That's based on the training. If you give it a role writing Shakespearean, it's going to use the Shakespearean data set which it was trained on. And all of this is well and good, and I'm sure some of you will be interested and some of you will be thinking, how can it help my agency? Yeah. And the reason it's important to understand this is because it doesn't fundamentally understand the words that we're giving it and the outputs that it gives us, but it's just very good at predicting, and it's got these mathematical formulas which allow it to give coherent thought. But it isn't trained on your agency.
No.
And so a human with inference will understand the task much better only if they had a little bit of context about your agency. This isn't how machines think.
No.
They need to be trained on your data as well.
And it still gets, even though, I mean, I've been saying how clever it is and how amazing, which of course is true, but it still gets stuff wrong as well, doesn't it? Still
Exactly.
hallucinates,
Yeah.
or just gets facts wrong.
Yeah. And ultimately, it's a genius because it's very fast. It's ingested all these facts and it's very good at retaining that information. These algorithms are very fascinating, but it's a generalist, and they made it that way. All of these incredible corporations, and with Gemini, with Google, and OpenAI, ChatGPT, Claude, as we're favourable of right now. They wanted to make a product that anyone could use, but a core philosophy that we have is that it's good to specialize and to niche, to focus. And so we want to use AI in a way that makes it a specialist on your agency. And this corresponds greatly to how the architecture of how these machines think. Because once you understand that they're prediction machines, they need data to use these formulas, it compels you to give it as much context of yours as possible at every opportunity.
So you talked about context there, and obviously, that's important. But it just strikes me, what's the difference between giving, if you're an agent running an agency, which is what the business that we're in and focused on, what's the difference between giving your AI your agency context, or maybe even your client context, and just using it sort of out of the box? Because as we've been talking, these things are immensely clever, and so it's so clever. What is this context really needed?
Yeah, so it's a testament to how intelligent these machines are, and that, I mean, it's artificial intelligence. It almost doesn't do it justice calling it artificial, because it's so clever.
Yeah.
It's so good at ingesting so much data. I'm talking trillions of different data points, that it has a great knowledge on most things, and ultimately it's got knowledge on what us humans have put on the internet and what we have given it. It's not creating anything new. It's just learning what's already out there, but can read and ingest things quicker than anyone. So the problem with that is it can answer questions fluently and confidently, even if it's the wrong answer or a suboptimal answer. The way these machines work in general is regression to the mean. We're talking about probabilities earlier. It's all about predicting what's the most likely next answer. It's the average, things that if someone's a personal trainer, their advice would be much better than AI's advice. But if they use AI, it would drag them down to the average. Someone who has no idea about fitness can greatly bolster their knowledge by AI. But it's meant to be mediocre, if you will.
We're starting to realise that with in some recent meetings I've had on the creative generation front with AI. So I've been speaking to a number of agencies recently that are not themselves, but the market is realising that whilst generating creative concepts, visuals, copy it's brilliant at, but it does create average ultimately, because it's bringing in everything and creating an average. So there's certain agencies I'm talking to that are actually not stopping using AI, but only using it to a certain point, and using it with more human input.
It's very easy to spot a ChatGPT generated brochure, I've noticed. It's pretty much everywhere. And they look great. It would have taken a graphic designer a lot of skill to do that in the past. But they do that because it's the most likely next answer. This is why they're so similar, because that's the average that they're trained on. And a little tip, there is a variable called temperature, which basically makes the probabilities more random. So it kind of makes all the calculus, the formulas that these are trained on, instead of being the most likely next answer, the probabilities can get differentiated in the sense. So if you say turn the temperature up to the max and you're generating a visual, it'll give you something vastly different because it's not going on average anymore. That's a little tip. So in this case, to go back to your question, if I was to generate a proposal, or an agency was to generate a proposal for a new potential client, it would invent the whole thing. It would invent, the price, the deliverables, the time frame, the certain sort of quality markers that an agency might have, the guarantees. And
by pulling all those proposals in from all the resources it's got.
You could even say, make me a McKinsey or Bain proposal, and it'll take the logic, and maybe there's books online or there's articles, and that's all well and good, but it isn't yours.
Yeah.
And we're mainly dealing with agencies and helping agencies that have been in business for a long time, and they've already got established processes and established offers that work so well. We don't want AI inventing the wheel, nor should it. I think it's all about making whatever already worked so well for your agency even quicker, and therefore you can spend a little bit more time on making the quality good as well. But it invents the whole thing in a proposal in this case. We are on Claude, and I love co-work, as we'll explain a little bit about a bit later in the episode. I have basically let it ingested myself, our whole framework. So the standout system, which we covered in episode 1. So it knows I do an AI audit at the kind of, when I start to work with agencies, and so it knows the price, it knows that I do a 90-minute diagnostic of the pillars, and then a 90-minute report delivery. I've got a separate presentation deck, separate large comprehensive report. All of these details that I have made, it understands, and it's every time I interact with Claude and I talk about my offer, it will pull up that file that's been saved by me, or multiple files, and it will understand exactly what my offer is because I'm the one who has given it that extra data.
Yeah.
This is called RAG, fundamentally. It's Retrieval Augmented Generation, which basically means AI has had all of this training with all of this data. You're giving it more data, and in this case, it's your data. It's the ones that's important.
So your proposals, agencies do proposals of various shapes and sizes, of course. So I guess, are we saying then, for if agencies listening out, that we upload your bank of the last 12 months proposals to AI and to your whatever AI you're using, upload the files, upload the credentials deck, upload the proposals.
Yeah.
It knows more about you. Is that job done?
Yeah, I'd say there's multiple steps, of course, and there's ways of doing it. But in general, people have caught on very quickly to the fact that they should bring in external files into chat histories. But the problem with most agencies that I see, and this is particularly applicable with large teams, is that the context dies in the chat. So especially if everyone's on personal plans, they might have a great amount of context. They might have ingested their certain offer of a kind that they're doing a proposal for, and then the AI gives better outputs because it has that extra information. That can't really be shared across the whole team.
And it forgets, doesn't it?
And it forgets that. Yeah. So the idea is to have an agency plan, of course, which I'll always recommend, and that has implications with governance, as we'll discuss a little bit later. But
and that's like explain to people what that means. So an agency plan is a central file?
Oh yeah, so sorry, the agency plan is purely, it's a company bought and owned subscription to the tool.
Yeah.
So
I see. Yeah.
We'll discuss with contracts, but in general, it's everyone wants to be under the same hood.
Of course, yeah. And no, we don't want people using personal plans, do we?
Because that's shadow AI.
Yeah.
Especially free plans, because you can put might put sensitive data, model trainings turned on, ingest that context. There's been some horror stories with that.
So step number 1, invest, and it is an investment because particularly if you're a larger business, this is a lot of money. but you've got to invest in the if you want to get this right, you've got to invest in the business plans, haven't you, and not have people using their own plans and not having people using their own favoured AI chat that they they're using at home.
Yeah, completely. And
for all sorts of reasons, but to get this right, but also obviously for data protection and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. We have gone to Claude. I mentioned co-work is an amazing environment. It's almost like the difference in how I explain the different types of Claude. There's three. There's chat, co-work, and code. Chat is your search engine. Co-work is your employee, because this is my preferred environment to ingest all this context. Yeah. So you're saying, how does an agency go on to do that? And just for the record, code is more like the developer in this case, but co-work, the employee. How do you go about doing that?
So get the business plan first.
Make sure you get that.
But then a central file, a central information repository.
Exactly. And in psychology, in my degree, I did research methods, and that's all about data analysis. Fundamentally, there's two different types of data. Quantitative, which is all about the files that exist, that you can quantify them. It's frameworks, it's files.
Numbers.
Anything written down, numbers, definitely. That's the main kind of makeup of quantitative data, because you quantify it, of course. And then qualitative, so there's nuance that you get through conversations, and perhaps it's the knowledge and IP trapped in people's heads. So
just examples of that for an agency might be, the quantitative might be your rate card, if you have rate cards, your pricing mechanism, your capacity, number of people. And results, case studies of work you've done in the past, where you can prove ROI, quantitative stuff, and qualitative might be, well, many examples, but one obvious one is the language, the sort of tone of voice that the agency uses, words and phrases and language that you, as your agency brand, want to use, and potentially a list of words, phrases, tone of voice that you want to avoid. Depending on your agency, depending on your own personal view, the market that you're selling to, you've got to really define that, haven't you? As you would do in any marketing communication brief and brand communication brief, but this is about cementing this into the AI, isn't it? So it knows.
Yeah, and brand voice and tone of voice is a good example, because in every single bit of context and area of your agency that you want to ingest, it's going to be both quantitative and qualitative. So brand voice is one that's mainly qualitative, because it's picked up by people's natural way of speaking and interacting with clients. I worked with an agency recently where, as part of the quantitative data, we got the BBC English grammar guidelines and ingested that. Right. And that was alongside more quantitative data in the form of this agency's past LinkedIn posts, website copy, perhaps it's slide decks that they've had internally in the past that they've made, which is like the kind of source of truth which is already out there. We did that, and we had an interview where we actually just spoke, or it's from transcripts from podcasts and things like this, where it isn't exactly planned, but it captures that kind of nuance that the files and the quantitative data wouldn't get. So it's about bringing all of that together. And the way that is the best to make these files is to start in one chat. So I do this in co-work, bring in all of those files, so put them in the chat history, ones that would usually die if you were to move on. But the idea is we're going to put all this context into a chat and then take it out and get it to remember that in the form of a file. So we'll capture these podcast transcripts and meeting transcripts where we've done tone of voice questions, capture the BBC brand guidelines, website, LinkedIn, that's all in there. Then we go, okay, AI, I'd like you to make me an MD file. This is the preferred one. They can read, various types of documents, but MD files are the simplest.
Markdown
files, and it can then format that, all of that context, and lay it out nicely. once that file's saved, you can then keep that.
Yeah.
And it's making all of these little different ones.
That's its source of truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think we should, just before we move on, these are the foundations, aren't they? Things like brand voice and pricing, rate cards, etc. Foundations of the agency. But one really important one that we mustn't skip over, I don't think, is process, isn't it? Your processes in your agency should be in this thing as well.
Completely, yeah.
Or in if it's not in one file, it can be in a number of these markdown files as reference points.
Yeah, and that's almost the next step. This fundamental context of an agency. And simply, it's if you were to hire or have a new hire, what would you teach them in the first couple of weeks? It's all these different things. You know, I've kind of done this co-work Claude onboarding with a few agencies, and it's all about our brand voice, even AI policy, so that every time you use an environment, it reads that policy and it's aware of the do's and don'ts, and it can inform team members. It's company wikis really, but it's in AI as frameworks they use. It's values and mission and past credential, all this kind of stuff. But as you say, processes, it's packaged context, but almost in a more meticulous format in the sense of I've come to learn, being relatively new to the agency world, that things like SOPs aren't the most common thing to see.
No, standard operating procedures.
Exactly. So the fact that I haven't even said this, sort of explained the acronym there, and it says a lot because it's.
I did explain it because I think you're absolutely right. It was a shock to you, but it's not such a shock to me. Although it's something that I do reflect on often and think that agencies are behind other industries, massively behind in this case, in that processes are rarely written down in agencies. In smaller independent agencies, certainly not in every case, of course, but how often do we come across agencies that we talk to and say, right, you need to put your SOPs, processes, standard operating procedures, whatever you want to call them, into a file and a document that AI can read and refer to and form its knowledge base. And before anybody needs to go any further, we get the response, actually, hang on a minute, we know what we do, of course, we do it every single day, but it's not written down anywhere. Or if it's written down, it's in a poor format that's not been referenced or amended recently. Lots of stuff that people are doing are in either everybody's or certain people's in the agency's heads. So that's step one, isn't it, to get that stuff down.
And this is the quickest, easiest win with AI, I'd say, bar none.
Yeah.
It's what's called almost separate personas. You're making agents is the word for it, really. And you have ChatGPT has GPTs, Gemini has gems, Claude has skills and project folders. Skills are a little bit more advanced. I take a liking to them.
Yeah.
We said a lot before about how AI is trained on these massive data sets. When you give AI a role and you give it a workflow and you tell it its tone of voice or what kind of role it should play, what it should be the expert in, it's almost getting rid of all the noise. Instead of looking at its whole data set and giving its best inference and making all these predictions, it's going, okay, if you're an agency that specializes in web design, it's going to go, right, I'm going to focus on all of the web design data that I've been trained on right now. Let's get rid of everything else. I'm the web design expert. I'm not going to look at law. I'm not going to look at being a physio, all these random
Don't
things
worry too much about your first example. Don't worry too much about kings and queens and connecting those.
Exactly,
Probably not that relevant, but focus on this. Focus on how we work, pricing, who we work with. What our tone of voice is, what we do as an agency, of course.
And the good thing about these packaged systems is that once AI knows what your workflow is, it's the source of truth, and it can teach your team. So if leadership create this process, or it's a very experienced team member who's done it for many years and knows it better than anyone, if they make sure that all of that knowledge in their heads is in the AI system, if a new team member gets stuck, perhaps it's a junior that's just been onboarded and they're struggling, as long as the agent has been configured by the person who's very knowledgeable, the junior can then ask it questions on what the workflow is and how they should do it. That's
Which
why
fills a bit of a gap that we've always
Yeah.
had in agencies, that these processes, we said earlier, generally aren't written down.
Yeah.
New people come into the business, do our best to onboard them, of course, partner them up with somebody knowledgeable in the business that understands the agency and has been and has worked in the agency for a while. But there's not that unless that person's there with their buddy or whatever in the early days of their onboarding. There's generally no real reference point. So AI can actually not just solve problems, but it can sort of help to educate people.
And
the business.
The more you accumulate this knowledge, the more future-proofed you are to AI innovation in the future. Because I think undoubtedly, the more people rely on AI tools in their business, which is where it's going, the higher prices these companies can then inflict on their users. And so if it comes to a point where your trusted AI provider starts charging you 10 times more, the context is the value. And as long as this is packaged and it's accumulating over time, every time you use AI chats, I have a system that on every session, it takes all the context in the chat and it files it like a librarian across like things like offers and decisions, and perhaps it's new revelations in the business or a change to my offer, things like this. The more AI is accumulating this knowledge, the more prepared you'll be for the future, because you can plug all this context into a different tool. Your agency's context is the value. It's all about documenting what's in your heads, your whole business.
So, Callum, this episode is about making AI work for your agency. We've talked a lot about how AI works, how it's immensely clever, but also how it is a machine and it's doing things predicting words, not actually conversing. We often get, or we have often received requests in the last 6 to 12 months from agencies and about the thing that they most want, or we talked about prioritizing what they want in AI earlier. And we often get the request for, I want a company brain. That's my goal. Deliver us a company brain, guys.
I don't blame them.
No, neither do I. Because that's more than possible, an AI company brain, and more than desirable. But when we've had those conversations, we often feel like we're putting the brakes on people's ambition. So we always say to people, you need to get bringing it back to a human brain, your knowledge and your experience and your memories written down in the form of data before you even start to think about how you connect that to and how you start to deploy that as an AI company brain. And there's a stage before that we've already touched upon, but just to finish off, summarize for us what that stage is and how you make that, how you bridge that gap if you're an agency.
So, Gareth, you're completely right. The analogy of the human brain is one I love because I have that background in psychology, and completely AI itself, without any kind of context of your agency, is pretty suboptimal. You can't really do the work that you want it to. You've got mediocre outputs. It's like if you were to, God forbid this happened, but if one of your team members' memories was wiped suddenly, they wouldn't have any idea of what to do. They might have their general intelligence, but they don't know anything about the agency. And so a lot of agencies have the ambition, especially agencies that are doing very well and have the money to spend and want to get ahead of their competition, to create some grandiose kind of complex company brain. And going back to what we were saying at the start of this episode, this brain, the difference between just it reading files from RAG and creating its own brain, you can use AI and all the algorithms where it learns the meaning between words, but it's the meaning between words in the context of your agency. So these brains, which could set you back sort of 50 grand, and there's things like there's technical knowledge graphs and there's automated ingestion, and you plug it into any AI tool, they would perhaps know, you could configure it to go, okay, this client relates to this team member does these processes, has this tone of voice, these are their strengths and weaknesses. It knows more about the relationship between your own data. But the problem is, if you don't have that data tracked and documented, you can't possibly make that. It's like you said, it's a brain without any memories. And so the start of the process, and why I recommend co-work, is to get the core data over time. Like, what would you teach to a new employee in the first couple of weeks? Things like simply a document explaining who you are, like who is agency X.
Yeah.
And it's all about, these are the credentials we have, these are the people we help, this is when we were founded, these are the awards that we've won, this is the team size.
I think that's a good way revenue. That's a good way of looking at it, and almost you got to start with the basics, but almost maybe if you imagine you're appointing a new managing director, you're retaining the agency ownership. You're employing your first MD, and you're bringing them in. You're giving them the basics, but then over time you're going to give that person, because they're senior and going to run the business for you, you're giving them more and more context, data, information, knowledge about the business, aren't you? So it's almost looking at it like that, isn't it?
Completely, yeah. And there's things like the examples that I've worked with agencies in the past of what information to digitize. It's who is agency X, it's brand voice, it's frameworks that they use most often, it's ingesting cred decks and ingesting those awards and their kind of
who they work with,
clients. So there's all these types of things, and like I said, simply it's for each one of those kind of context files, you get all of the quantitative data, all of the files, the spreadsheets, the frameworks, so the things that are already written down. Maybe it's LinkedIn posts that you've done, notes that you have about a certain topic. And then you can actually get AI, once it's ingested all those files, to go, you can get it to interview you. So you can go, ask me 100 questions to understand who the agency serves, or what the agency is fundamentally, and then it will dig deeper. You can sit with a leadership team, record the transcript, answer all these questions together. There's Whisper Flow, which we now love, where you could do this.
Let's get to listen,
Yeah, you can sort of dictate your thoughts rather than typing them all. We're in. So ultimately, we get all of this data compiled and we save it as markdown files. That's the preferred. It's almost the format that AI can read best.
Yeah, and quickest.
Yeah. And that's, so it's platform agnostic.
Yeah.
We're massive fans of Claude. With teams that I've worked in that use Claude as well, we can package that information in plugins. Everyone downloads the plugin, they get all the skills and markdown files.
Yeah. That's a great point though, actually. If you've got markdown files, you can transfer, if you do choose to transfer or use two LLMs at once, you can use the same files, can't you?
Yeah. Reference points. And that's the future-proofing element. And so you can then package these, use it in your sort of AI provider of choice.
Yeah.
Okay. So we just say, package it, put it in any provider that you want. And I'll wrap it up now. I'll just say that.
And that's, I think, and so once you've got that, that's your start of your brain journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so once you've got that, then you can start to think more aggressively. No, that's the wrong word. You can start to think more proactively about how you might then capture that in a company brain.
Yeah. And that is the strategy. If you start with that step, you can't go wrong, because it's almost the start of the journey to more technical systems. And I do believe that in 15, 20 years' time, who knows how rapidly these tools will evolve and how the industry will as a whole. But I imagine every agency will have their brain anyway. There'll be companies that install them for you and all this. But to make their jobs easier in the future and to get to that level, start documenting and digitizing everything that you can about your agency so that AI can become your employee, not just an off-the-shelf tool.
Great summary. Enjoyed that, Cal.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Hope you guys enjoyed listening, and We'll see you next week.
Yeah. If you don't want to miss the next episode, hit subscribe on your favourite channel, podcast application. And see you next time.
Great. See you next week.